This whole session is really around redefining how and why and what the processes are and structures are around investing into nature and biodiversity, with a focus on Southeast Asia in particular. So my name is Matt Leggett. I run a company called Terratai. We're based in Indonesia, and we are a company which is designed specifically to try and answer this problem, how to unlock capital for nature and biodiversity. Yuni Choi, so our co-founder and head of investments, is also at the back of the room. And I'm joined today by some great speakers who've joined us from Indonesia. So we've all traveled a fair distance to get here. There's an enormous amount of expertise in the room, and yeah, please both talk to your kind of facilitators, and also we'd love to hear more from you in the circles around your own expertise. The purpose of this workshop is very much to try and start to dig into some of these questions. I think we've heard, at least I have in SOCAP the last couple of days, a lot around the question of the missing middle in finance, finance that's struggling to flow down to impact. And this session is really designed to try and get into that question, specifically looking at nature and biodiversity. So first of all, a little bit about Terratai. So Terratai, as I said, focused in Indonesia, expanding in 2026 to Southeast Asia. Our company is designed specifically to try and unlock capital for nature. And what we do is we provide a combination of access to expertise, so venture building services, alongside early stage impact investment, really trying to tackle the missing middle of finance and to help companies that have great nature-based models grow from the point where they are just really graduating out of their ability to access grant finance and helping them grow to the point where they can access early stage investment capital. So we're very much an enthusiastic mover in this space in Southeast Asia. To start with, I'd be really interested if you can, maybe by a show of hands, who in the room is already working in Southeast Asia? Okay, and for those who aren't already working in Southeast Asia, are there those who are interested in working in Southeast Asia and trying to understand the kind of challenges and gaps? Okay, good. All right, fantastic. So this is very much a kind of hands-on session. So I'm not going to delay very much with slides, but let me move into just some very quick introductions of our team, of our panelists. So I'd actually quite like to hand over to each of the experts to do a quick introduction this morning in your groups. So if you can find yourself a microphone, and then I'm going to pass over to you to do a quick 15 to 30 second introduction for who you are, why you're here, and why this topic is important to you. So maybe, Dejan, should we start with you, if you could find a microphone?
All right, good morning, everyone. My name is Dirk-Jan Oudshoorn. I'm from the Netherlands. You can call me DJ, it's a bit easier to pronounce. Like Matt said, we are working in Indonesia. My company is called Forestwise. We have been working in Indonesia since 2018. And our company is working in the field of rainforest conservation by developing products that we derive from the rainforest in a sustainable way. And thereby creating more economic value to the rainforest. So the idea is that we make it much more profitable to keep the forest standing compared to cutting it down. And we do this, the most of our products are going into the food and cosmetic industry. So you can think about like vegetable oils, butters, and sugars. Right, let me hand it over to Yuni.
Hi everyone, good morning. My name is Yuni. I'm the co-founder and head of investments at Terratai, so I'll be leading investors and funders group. So my interest is really sharing the challenges that we have faced, but also some of the solutions that we have developed to tackle these challenges. And I'm sure there are a lot of experts in this room, so also to learn from the experts in the group.
Hi everyone, good morning. My name is Gita. I represent the Earth-Centered Ekonomi Coalition from Indonesia, and our work basically is trying to build a framework to connect actors throughout the value chain beyond transaction, moving into a more relational. We have a model called the value chain collaboration model, in which we connect community on the ground with processing companies with innovation such as Forestwise and also potential buyers, so that it becomes a more appealing and attractive package for policymakers at local and national level, but also for financiers, preferably all kind. So investors, funders, and financiers in terms of commercial. And with the hope of that, we can actually escalate what looks like one company at a time into a more macro scenario of responsible bioeconomy across the country to reduce addiction towards extractive and large-scale monoculture industry in the country. That is the urgent mission that we're carrying forward. Looking forward to lead the enablers group and maybe focusing on the way that all of organization that becomes that provide enabling condition can come and support. So happy to be here.
Fantastic. Thank you for that. Yeah, as you can tell, they're all very humble. I know this is an extraordinarily powerful group of people that we've gathered here from Southeast Asia. So please do kind of pick their brains. It's an extraordinary amount of experience they have in the room working on this topic. We had an event last night to launch a new financing facility that Terratai is developing. And I was saying last night that it's rare to see DJ wearing so many clean clothes. He's normally covered in mud, having extracted himself from the rainforest, and has spent many, many years kind of trekking out of the forest on the back of a motorbike, trying to actually make Forestwise be the business it is today. So it's pretty extraordinary. A few quick kind of housekeeping points. The first thing I'd say is we do try and keep to Chatham House rules. So please, by all means, talk about the conversations you've had today, but please no attribution. It is good to make sure we can kind of leave our organizational hats at the door and have an open and honest conversation about the challenges we're seeing. I'm going to try and get Mentimeter to work. So I'm sure some of you have used this before. Unfortunately, we can't display results on the screen because SOCAP will not enable me to do that. But we do have the capacity to do that on a phone, and there are some QR codes on little handouts on your chairs that I will make sure are working at some point before we finish the session. And perhaps just to kind of set the scene a little bit more around kind of why we're here. What's the purpose of this conversation? So as you know, at the moment in the conversation around conservation and nature finance, we know that we have around an $800 billion a year gap to meet climate targets. $800 billion a year will not only come from public sector finance. A lot of this needs to come from private finance. It needs to come from a reduction of the bad, so a reduction of the subsidies and policies that are driving degradation and destruction of ecosystems around Southeast Asia. But it also needs to come from a whole lot of new ideas, new concepts, new initiatives, new partnerships, new collaborations. So this conversation is really to try and unlock and pick apart what some of the challenges are between this in this sector. And the reason we split the room into three is because, broadly speaking, when we look at the entire system of operators and actors and collaborators, we broadly see often the world dividing into three silos. This isn't a recommendation that we maintain these silos. This is just a representation of really the problems that we see right now. So as Gita said, one of the things that Gita's work focuses on is really kind of actually breaking down some of the silos between public and private and thinking about how the government can also act as an enabler between these different sectors. From the investors and funders side, it spans a whole gamut of the kind of capital continuum, everything from grants, repayable grants. There's a move now towards much more catalytic capital in the grant sector, how grants can be used both to de-risk and also potentially even take sort of first risks in some investments. So there's some really interesting conversations there. And then on the initiative side, where DJ is sitting, the work that actually needs to get done on the ground. How do we support the early stage businesses, the initiatives on the ground that are actually trying to get this work done? And sometimes that might come in the form of a company like Forestwise, and sometimes it might come in the form of an initiative that perhaps is run by an NGO looking to scale up, potentially to access private sector capital. It may even come from the private sector themselves. So the purpose of this conversation is to really sort of break down some of these conversations into, what are the challenges that are really stopping us from getting more capital into nature? Is it a lack of ability to really measure and monitor impact? Is it some real regulatory issues that might face specific countries that could potentially give lessons for others? So that's really the purpose of the conversation today. I'm going to stop talking because I do want to make sure that we have the bulk of our time in session. So the plan is to have 20 to 30 minutes of conversation between the small groups. We're then going to kind of feed back with some questions from the small groups and think about kind of cross collaboration and fertilization between those conversations, and then wrap up at the end. We don't have an enormous amount of time today, so we'll wrap up the end with a bit of reflections from our facilitators. So what we need to do now, we have sort of around about 10 minutes or so remaining, and recognizing that, this is the very tip of the iceberg, the ice cube on the iceberg in terms of the conversation. So I think we need to move to just getting some roundup, really. I'd love to hear from each of the groups. Perhaps Yuni, DJ, and Gita can help feedback some of the things that were coming out. I dropped into a couple of conversations and some really interesting points being made. So perhaps, Yuni, do you want to kick off with an attempt to round up some of the conversations that you are having? And perhaps there might also be others in the group who want to add some points. There's a microphone somewhere if you need it.
We started off talking about some of the challenges associated with time horizon. So it usually takes longer to exit from nature-based solutions or nature-positive companies. And then exit strategy can be more complex. And then we talked quite a lot about innovative sort of financing mechanisms that we've been trialing. So some of the examples are revenue-based loans, convertible loans, impact-linked loans. One investor in our circle is actually providing first loss as investment into the ventures, which is quite amazing in terms of impact first approach. And then there were also more. There was also another innovative approach, which is outcome based financing. And then I think there are attempts to make it more simplified, to be based more on milestones instead of complex legal structures. We also talked about more scalable, like larger size innovative financing mechanisms, such as nature debt swap and also water funds. And there was also one very cool concept, which is net positive water, which could apply to corporates that are consuming large amount of water. So they invest into innovations that can recover the water supply. So we had quite a good conversation about that. And then another stream of conversation was about challenges with impact measurement. So obviously there are a lot of different frameworks, but the challenge is that there are so many diverse different models within nature-based solutions. So sometimes it can be quite confusing or time-consuming. So we were talking about like more needs for education on these topics, and also there could be a role of AI or new tools to guide investors for key metrics for each nature-based solutions. So I could not summarize everything, but these are some of the
Okay.
conversations we had.
Any kind of light bulb moments from the group? Anything that really stood out from the group? Maybe, I don't know if anybody wants to add anything else. Anything that you kind of heard that you hadn't really thought about before? Total silence.
Maybe no light bulb.
No light bulb moments. Okay, that's fine. Gita's furiously drawing on a whiteboard, so okay, I'll give you a minute. DJ, would you like to give a little bit of feedback? There's some really interesting conversations around nature-linked insurance that I dropped in on. There were some really interesting chats around unlocking capital. So over to you, DJ.
All right, thanks, Matt. We also had a lot of interesting conversations this morning, and really nice to learn about all the things the people are working on. So the first question was around how do we better connect supply with demand, and we talked about the importance of having offtake agreements in place with launching customers, before before you're able to scale, and how to incentivize that, or how to make that happen. And government support or grant support is key in that. And indeed, we talked about de-risking. So what role insurance companies can play into de-risking these the concepts or these projects. So that was quite new and refreshing. Also involving universities to show that nature-based solutions work. So maybe keeping the cost low. And proving like, okay, what are the other outcomes or other benefits of this project other than just a relationship of producing and selling. And then we moved into what are the barriers that founders face to raise capital. We talked about having how important it is to have a launching customer in place. A big barrier being that a lot of funders are really still mostly focused on the ROR. So that's we have to find a way to show like, oh, it's not only about making profit, but it can also be about what are the other side benefits on the long run, and maybe you can see like how that can be communicated in a different way. Increasing, for example, storytelling to promote that, and also maybe focusing on small wins. There was an example of maybe if the product is used for like the first target was maybe to have 30% of the product being replaced by this new product. But if we can already get companies to use 2% in their product, that's already a win. It might be a small win, but then at least there is traction, and we can take it from there.
Fantastic. I heard did you call it the sprinkle effect? Is that what you call it? Sprinkle method. The sprinkle method. Yeah, no, it's I like that a lot. And I think that has some real relevance for some of the companies that Terratai works with as well, sort of thinking about scaling ambition over time rather than expecting step changes overnight. Fantastic. And then arguably, and perhaps the piece that brings it all together, Gita, with some of the conversations around enabling conditions.
I think the group shared a lot about the policy side. We didn't get to talk much about the other side, but in terms of policy, there's a couple of things that were becoming the center, which is there's disconnect between how legislation are made versus what's needed, especially in the context of national and local level, community versus the actual policymakers. And in order to bridge that, we were sharing ideas and examples. There's three main things that might work as a solution. One is trying to find example from other places and collect the data as an evidence to prove it somewhere else. But in order for the data to actually help regulator to make better decision, you also need champion. So we had example from the US here, in which a legislation in one state is being used as an example to inspire other states. In Indonesia, it's also happening at district level, at provincial level, but you actually need policymaker champion in order to also become the spokesperson of the success story. Other methods that was discussed is also building policy from the ground up. There's an example from India, the water cup, where community at the village level actually recommend what type of policy intervention might work, and it becomes a competition nationwide, and the winner becomes the actual policy that gets implemented. The second component was finding initial model to test out as a proof of concept. And we also shared a lot about finding real recommendation of policy that works based on pain points. So looking at what would inspire people to actually move, for example, giving tax incentives for impact investment, giving tax incentives for entrepreneurs that works in a certain sector, providing interesting way to actually tap into pooled fund, such as the retirement saving account. In Canada, there's an example of community bonds that can actually be an interesting model to tap resources from. Then we moved towards the enablers as a supporting organization. We talk about disconnect also between local needs versus the expertise. Sometimes all of the expertise is very urban centric versus the need to actually go to the ground and solve nature-based problems. And we shared an example from Indonesia where it becomes training for local incubators instead of making urban incubators work at the field level. And then Alan also shared an example of gaps that they're facing in terms of bridging timeline of nature-based solution versus the investment appetite. I think the other group mentioned a bit about that and how our actors are just not talking to each other. So maybe that's one of the easiest problem to address, or the hardest problem to address, is how to get actors with different expertise. Like we have in this room, there's 3 different circles. What if the circle becomes one big circle? What type of conversation that would emerge out of that? So thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you. Thanks, everyone. We have, I believe, a couple of minutes left. So I do want to just throw it open to the floor. I don't know if you're anything like me, when I get to the end of these workshop sessions that have been incredibly short, there's always some annoying question I have that I wish I could have asked but didn't have time to ask. And that might be, as Gita said, across circles. So if anyone has a couple of minutes for questions, if you'd like to ask questions, then please do. Either that, or I'd be keen to kind of hear reflections from each of you about the kind of conversations that were going on and what was missing. Yeah, please, at the back.
I was just wondering seeing this group, what does nature positive mean? I guess that kind of goes into metrics, but like, what is it actually? What is it meaning? Is it just like supporting nature? Yeah, I don't know.
That should have been question number 1 as you walked in the door, I think.
True.
Like 1 minute to go. Okay. So look, I think there's obviously, as with every definition, there's a lot of dispute around the kind of terminology. I think if I can give you, I'll give you my answer, and I think we can kind of start with that. So Terratai works with businesses that are supporting outcomes for nature, and what we mean by that is, can the company demonstrate quantifiable positive outcomes for nature, biodiversity, climate? So is the business model in some way tangibly connected to outcomes for nature that are positive? I think that the risk with a term like nature positive is that it can become kind of slapped on pretty much any type of business. If you scrape hard enough, you will find some way of describing yourself as nature positive. And I think the responsibility kind of lies on us as investors, funders, enablers in this space to really ask exactly the same question you're asking. I think there's always going to be this risk that the term becomes very lightly used or poorly applied. So from our perspective, it comes down to data. So can you demonstrate that, if I buy product A, then the outcome of that product A purchase will be, for example, Forestwise is a great example. So for every Elipe product that Forestwise make is directly connected to a conservation agreement on the ground with local communities that make that forest, provide better protection for that forest. So there's a tangible connection between the work that DJ does in selling the products that you'll see outside on the table and an outcome for nature. And that can be measured, it can be mapped and managed over a period of time. If you can't do that, like for example, we often come up with ventures or investment opportunities. There's an app which is great for determining something to do with reduction of emissions and is developed by somebody in Jakarta and is city-based. Then you're already 2 or 3 steps away from really, as I would describe it, as being nature positive, because your impact is reliant on the work of a lot of other people in that chain. So I think that's often where it's poorly applied. But again, open to the floor about others.
Maybe quickly to add, because we support nature positive ventures, and most of them are more place-based. So what we really want to make sure is that there is positive relationship between nature and people through that business model. So instead of extractive business model, with that business model can restore and protect nature and also lift up the local economies. So we spend a lot of time verifying that relationship between nature and people. And I think another way to think about it is that when we make the investment, are we 100% sure, like 10 years or 20 years in the future, we'll actually find nature and local communities in better shapes? So that's also one way to think about it.
Yeah, just to add quickly on that, I think the nature ties in with the people and how to actually unlock culture of the people in the places where they are already taking care of nature, and the company can actually enable that better is the way that we're defining it. We have one here and one here.
In a conversation with someone at this conference, I heard that there's not really a standardized impact metric framework for a lot of investment, and I'm wondering how that breakdown might cause kind of friction between the innovative companies and the investors in terms of like getting alignment on what actually needs to happen, so that I as a company can position myself to get investment and you as an investor know that I'm hitting all these things that you want. How much does that actually make an impact? I guess kind of an open question to the floor.
Should we just take both and then?
Yeah, let's take both. Let's go for it.
Just in response to your question, comment, to me, it's also really thinking in terms of biomimicry and how can we learn from nature. Nature has 4.3 billion years of experience. And so I really think the more that we can think even in how we design our businesses, how we're using resources to just see what we can learn from nature. And there's a lot on biomimicry and the Biomimicry Institute I really encourage people to check out. But I think all the answers are out there. We just need to remember we are a part of nature, not apart from it. And if we apply that to all of our business and investing, we could really move things forward faster, I think.
Fantastic.
Thank you. So questions here, an additional comment. There was one more hand, I think.
One more question before we close. One at the back there.
Just asking about, is it possible to create a rubric or some sort of certification? Like a LEED certified building, like a B Corp certification? What are the rubrics for B Corp? It's about how you treat workers, how you address community needs, how you, what are the other B Corp certifications? Yeah, you got it. There's like 5 rubrics.
Yeah. So I think this question of metrics, I'm glad it came up. I'm sorry it came up so late. Because I think it kind of goes to the heart of some of both the point around biomimicry. You know, nature's incredibly complicated. So Terratai is an example. We work across the whole spectrum from forests to oceans. And within there, we're looking at potentially 50, 60, 70 different types of business models. How do you come up with a framework which enables you to kind of compare and contrast those business models? I think is something that's very difficult. I think there are ways increasingly that you probably heard conversations around biodiversity credits. There's an increasing conversation now around the metrics that might be used to associate quality with biodiversity credits, which is very interesting. But I think you will always have this challenge of managing complexity. Every business model is slightly different. Every ecosystem is slightly different. Every outcome you're necessarily looking for is also slightly different. However, I do think there are ways to structure and standardize the approach which you're taking to look at measuring biodiversity and managing those outcomes. So I think in there is something that could be helpful in terms of standardization. But I also wanted to pick up on. Okay, we've got 10 minutes. So I also wanted to pick up on this question you had, because I actually think that would be quite good to aim towards this group. You know, in terms of investments and funders and finance, how does this question around metrics, around standards, around standardization, how does this play out in the conversations you're having in terms of whether this is a factor that is either providing some stickiness, providing some barriers, providing some challenge around unlocking finance? That might be quite good to dig into.
Anyone?
I think it results in a bit of paralysis right? Because you have all of these investment choices, or, and you're not able to figure out what's going to give you the most impact for your resources. So I think that definitely, I don't think we can quantify it, but
Okay.
so I don't know if there's like an approach that investors can take to manage that uncertainty and paralysis.
I would add, sorry, I'm kind of talking in the wrong space. Thinking from a funder's perspective, I think there is a place to have someone doing the scoring, the scorecard, the metrics, whatever, because we can't all travel and confirm that the work Terratai is doing is being done correctly. So we need that, and yet I fully support this concern about paralysis. I feel like it's become this the metric will solve everything. We were talking in our group about it. It's almost like we're building this machine that is like an AI metric, impact metric thing. And I would argue we just don't have time. The rest of the world is getting torched and burned, and we internally are trying to score this and score that from every single possible perspective. I worry about the paralysis, and let's have someone else do it, and then let's move on.
You want to add?
Well, it's fundamentally about relationships, right? And so if we are turning our failures into learnings for the next mobilization of resources, and then having that relationship be the metric by which we try the next experiment, that I think is essential for overcoming the paralysis. We can't afford to be paralyzed right now. The wealth holders that are here at SOCAP need to be mobilizers of resources.
Yeah, I think this question of paralysis can go both ways, right? You can be paralyzed by a lack of data. You can also be paralyzed by too much. I think that's something that we see quite a lot. When we say to some investors, "Hey, yeah, we've got a menu of 26 different indicators that will tell you exactly what's going on in this particular landscape. We spent 6 months doing due diligence on this company. We've been to the field with them. We have all of this information." And a lot of people go, "Is it good?" and then you're like, "What? Where does the balance lie between having the right amount of information and having too much?" Because I think we've seen in things like the carbon market, as an example, the explosion of different certification methodologies. We've seen in the food sector, certification after certification after certification, and companies having to respond to that, and they have multiple levels of certification. They're kind of constantly going out, getting the next level of certification. DJ, for example, with Forestwise, thinking about like the kinds of certification that you guys might need to access certain markets. There's a point at which the data burden becomes its own kind of paralysis. So like, how do we move beyond that? I think is a really, really kind of pressing question.
Yeah, just as a add-on to kind of how policy ties back into this whole discussion. A lot of the companies that we work with, when it comes to metrics, they don't have resources to actually come and measure. So how can this become something that the government incentivize or the investor incentivize and enable the company to do? And plus, looking at it as a new kind of job opportunities for people on the ground to be enumerators also. So opening this up as opportunities instead of burden is the other angle that maybe we are thinking about highlighting. Because right now, a researcher or enumerator from outside goes and travel. Meanwhile, there are people looking for jobs, youth that are wanting to stay at the place that can be part of that ecosystem that has not been considered even.
So one question there about.
Yeah. No, I think this question of certification and metrics, to me, it's like a bit of a forest for the trees kind of thing. It should be, we can certify and we can have metrics in service of the end goal. So it's a means to an end, not the end in and of itself, right? And so the end is, let's shift the entire system so that these solutions become mainstream. So if a certification or metrics are helping individual solutions become more mainstream, that's great. But if they're not, if it's not leading to deeper and greater adoption, if it's causing paralysis or any other thing that's not the full adoption, then what's the point?
Yep. Okay. Fantastic. Yeah, I know. We perhaps could have started with that question at the very beginning. I think this goes to the heart of really sort of some of the questions around how to unlock capital into nature, because it comes up again and again and again. This question around balance of data, balance of knowledge, the balance of the ability to really develop trust in what you're seeing, I think is something that comes up again and again. And I think you see it from, Forestwise's perspective on the ground, a company that's really trying to get this work done. You see it from Gita's perspective and thinking about how to bring together these different sectors to collaborate and to work together to solve these problems. And we certainly see it, in Terratai, both the terrifying lack of questions around impact. We have investors who are simply wanting us to just tell them it's good, all the way to the other end, where investors are so hung up on the data that perhaps they don't see the wood for the trees anymore. We've essentially run out of time, unfortunately. But I wanted to just maybe give one last 10 seconds to Yuni, Gita, and DJ just to, make one final point in summing up. I don't think you need to hear any more from me. So can I just hand over to you three to kind of make your last point, your last plea, your last hanging question before we move on to the rest of the day?
All right, thanks. 10 seconds. Okay, I'll give it a try. I think the two key takeaways for us, for me today, was the rate of return. So how do we to hear that that's still the main thing that investors are looking at. So how we can use storytelling, for example, to present all the benefits, I think is a great takeaway from today. Second is I think from our experience, we've really been helped by the grant funding from Partnership for Forest in this case. That helped us unlock 2 private investors to come on board who we knew personally. And that was the start of the company. So I think that has been key for us to unlock the investment.
Perfect.
So I think one reflection from me is that I think it was so nice to have this discussion together because I personally, I usually just talk to the ventures a lot. And then I think this kind of open discussion amongst different investors and funders with different mandates, different perspectives are really useful. So I want to think about how we can do that more often.
Perfect. Gita?
Yeah, I think my key takeaways will be imagining the room to be one big circle, as in all of the conversations flowing. But at the end of the day, when we talk about venture, transaction is what matters. There needs to be healthy cash flow for the company in order to unlock anything and to make any impact. So buy the product. I think even before us working as organization, we go back to how we do things as individuals also. So get to know the product that you're using right now and purchase more without looking at certification necessarily, but purchase more that are doing good and making good impact and communicate that to the world so that there's more of us that's convincing more money to go into transaction for companies making good impact.
Fantastic. That's a great finishing point.